In November of 2019, I approached Dan and I said, "You may think I'm crazy. I know our lives are hectic. Our house is busting at the seams. But one of the new Israeli emissaries, Ido, his name is, he's really great. What if we offer to be a host family for him this year?" You see, for over 20 years, our Jewish Federation has sponsored a year of service for recent high school graduates to work in the American Jewish community and serve as a living and personal bridge with Israel. This special year of service allows select young Israeli adults to defer their mandatory army service and spend time learning about American Jewish life and teaching us about Israel. I was thrilled when Dan agreed that we should be a host family for Ido. And in January of 2020, we welcomed him into our home for what was supposed to be a 3-month stay in the middle of his year in Connecticut. It wasn't long before Ido became a part of our family, and I know that he's watching today with us streaming online. He treated our boys like his younger brothers. We cooked dinners together. We talked about our day around the dinner table. We watched TV at night. One day I came home to find Ido organizing and throwing out expired canned goods in our pantry. And that's how I knew he was truly a part of the family. We collaborated to bring interesting and engaging Israel programming to our Temple Shalom community, and he loved having our congregation as a home base. I was sitting in our living room talking with Ido when I got the emergency text about school closures at the very beginning of the pandemic in March of 2020. We were nervous about what it would mean for Ido's remaining time in the U.S., and we joked that we would hide him in our attic and wait out the pandemic rather than send him back to Israel early. But sure enough, less than 1 week later, we drove him to JFK for his return flight with tears all around and the last hug we would share with anyone outside of our family for over a year. Rather than sit around his house for months during Israel's incredibly strict lockdown, Ido decided to move up his IDF enlistment date. And he quickly began his training and service in the elite combat unit, the Nachal Brigade. He spends a lot of his time out in the field, combating Hezbollah operations and threats from Syria in northern Israel. Ido sent us pictures on the day of his induction ceremony. With a complicated mix of fear and pride, Dan and I sent back our wishes. Mazel tov. Be safe, stay well. We love you. You see, Ido is just one of the many reasons, one of the many dear ones in our lives, whose very life is dependent on the peace, the safety, and security of the state of Israel. As American Jews, our collective relationship with Israel has become very complicated. In the early years of Israel's existence, Zionism represented the redemption of Jewish life. From the ashes and dust of destruction, we were able to rise up from powerlessness. The pioneers and ragtag fighters who protected Israel and made it bloom were fueled by a sacred mission. Their sacrifice would save Jewish civilization and make Israel a safe haven to ensure the future of the Jewish people. But today, the Middle East conflict, nuanced and multi-layered as it is, has succumbed, like so much of our discourse, to polarizing ideologies. We've all heard about the two diametrically opposed sides of this conflict. You're either pro-Palestinian or you're pro-Israeli. You can either participate in the boycott, divestment, and sanction movement, or you are heartless against the Palestinian plight. Israel is perfect, completely beyond reproach in its laws and methods of governance, or it is an apartheid state. It's not black and white. There's not just one party completely at fault. However, there is a common critique that holds Israel to an absolutely impossible standard. And I do believe that anti-Semitism is in play when public perception holds only Israel accountable. The boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, which supports Palestinian self-determination, delegitimizes Israel's right to exist as a sovereign nation on this earth. It demonizes the concept of Israel as the one Jewish nation on the earth among 50 Muslim majority nations. Detractors single out Israel as a chief perpetrator of human rights violations, despite the fact that Israel, the only democratic nation in the Middle East with a strict adherence to judicial process and due process, while saying nothing about horrific injustices perpetrated in totalitarian countries all around the world. We live in an age where truth is relative, distorted facts manipulated through memes and sound bites, and oversimplified assertions foment division and hatred in a way like never before. And in our own modern-day America, anti-Semitism expressed as anti-Zionism has become the last acceptable form of discrimination. It plagues our students on our college campuses, it plagues our social media feeds, and it makes the world less safe for Jews everywhere. We're caught between a rock and a hard place. From the extremes of the political right and left, we are at the same time perceived as an unwelcome minority and an oppressor. Jews who support Israel's right to exist simply are no longer included in intersectionality, while the rights of other minority groups are championed. We've known the anti-Semitism of white supremacy for a very long time. But this new and virulent anti-Semitism from the left leaves progressives like me, who support Israel, largely without allies. There's often a perverse justification for anti-Semitism couched in morality about the imbalance of power and the delegitimization of Israel's right to exist, painful rhetoric of apartheid and Israel's goal of ethnic cleansing, and that is simply untrue. Jews can be accepted as victims, but not as people with self-determination and not as people with power. New York Times columnist Bret Stephens wrote, "There's always been an allure to powerlessness. It means freedom from the personal and political burdens of responsibility, the moral dilemmas of choice. In an age in which victimhood is often conflated with virtue, it has a social cachet. To be powerless is to be pure. To be pure is to be innocent. But innocence comes at a price, one that has been particularly terrible for Jews. 19 centuries of expulsions, ostracism, massacres, and systemic discrimination led to Zionism, which was very simply a movement and a demand for sovereign Jewish power in the land of Israel. That the state of Israel was born, raised, and remains under fire isn't a sign of the failure of Zionism. It is a sign of the reminder of its necessity. Consider as an example the violence that occurred this past May in Israel, a 2-week period of protests, riots between Jews and Arabs, thousands of rockets fired into Israeli civilian targets by Hamas, and Israeli counterattacks in Gaza. The critique of Israel called for a more measured response and noted the difference in casualties on both sides of the conflict. Thousands of rockets were fired into major Israeli urban centers. Children and families spent days in and out of bomb shelters, waking in the middle of the night to run for cover. And it is only by modern miracle technology, the Iron Dome defense system, that saved thousands of Israeli lives. Would have been better if the casualties were more proportional, if more Israelis had been killed. How would the United States have reacted if our cities, our schools, and hospitals were beleaguered with missiles year after year, week after week, day after day by a sovereign enemy nation? Hamas, the ruling government of Gaza, specifically calls for the destruction of Israel in its charter. Would the world call for a more measured response from any other nation under attack? It was hard to escape the one-sided reporting in media coverage of this conflict, and Dan and I heard from Ido only sparsely between his training in the field during that time. It's getting really interesting, he said, with that unique Israeli brand of coping humor. We had to move a couple of times in the middle of the night to get out of the way of the rockets. You know, we're sleeping in the field. Training is intense, but I don't think they're going to send us into Gaza this week, he offered. I think there'll probably be a ceasefire before then. How personal all of this has become. But the future of Israel and public perception should be a matter of deep concern and urgency for all of us. Jewish safety in the world is a phenomenon unique only to the last 73 years. In the United States, Jews are represented in civic, social, and political settings and bolstered by strong Jewish communal institutions. And there is only one reason we have been able to rise to such positions in the United States, and that is the existence of Israel. As a democracy and unwavering ally, Israel maintains a balance of power in the Middle East. It works to dismantle terrorist networks that are our common enemy. It provides material support all over the world in areas of intelligence, technology, medicine, and humanitarian aid. And wherever Jews are marginalized, persecuted, or oppressed, Israel provides a safe haven and a beacon of hope. It is a miracle in and of itself. The war-torn refugees came to Israel from Europe, and the violence of the Arab world and the religious persecution of the Soviet Union and Ethiopia, and Zionism gave the Jewish people the strength, the resilience, and the endurance to even consider that there was hope for the future. A life beyond annihilation. Israel's existence makes Jews and people all over the world safer. Is Israel perfect? No. There are systems within Israeli society that fuel discrimination, misogyny, undermine religious pluralism. Horrific casualties occur in Israel's defensive wars and operations. There are laws that run counter to an espoused vision of democracy. There are factions that promote fanaticism, and there is racially driven social and economic disparity. Do these societal ills sound familiar to you? They should. Like in our own United States, there is constantly work of repair to be done. But I've never been in a place more alive with civic and political critique than in Israel. From the taxi driver to the fruit vendor in the open-air markets to pundits and politicians, in Israel, it's practically a patriotic duty to argue about politics. Largely because politics is existentially impactful for all who live there. Israel is a nation with unwavering commitment to freedom of speech and press, to the values of democracy and accountability. There is no nation that I know of so committed to holding itself, its government, and its defense to high ethical standards, constantly refining itself as the arc of public opinion bends towards justice. Many of you may be aware that when Israel loses faith with the elected government officials, the population can call for a new election at any time. Throughout this past year and a half, there have been 5 Israeli elections, resulting not only in a new prime minister, but in the advancement of democratic and progressive values. Last week, I got an update from Ido on the current political scene since the latest election. He wrote, "For the first time, an Arab party has a voice in the Knesset. They are non-Zionists, by the way, by definition, but accept a joint life together and a shared future. This new government just passed a budget in Israel for the first time in 3 years, and in the budget we can finally see a willingness to invest billions of dollars in Arab society, in villages, education, transportation, health systems. In the past week, a big wind of hope blows as we reconnect with our neighbors, Jordan and Egypt, emphasizing the importance of the peace we share. This government has the most women ministers in Israel's history, including 9 new women who hold some of the most challenging, powerful offices such as finance, education, environment, transportation, and the Office of the Interior. And one of the biggest changes in this new Knesset is the conversation around the Jewish world. How do we fix the relationship with Jews around the world, especially in the U.S.? But the big story is obviously Gilad Kariv, the first Reform rabbi ever to hold Knesset office. He serves as the head committee for Constitution, Law, and Justice, one of the most complicated committees. Kariv is well known for his work in the Arab-Israeli cooperation and helping weak communities. Change and growth is in the air. Israel is not perfect, but it is real, beautiful and bureaucratic, mystifying, intoxicating, frustrating, and incomparable. We will not agree with all the politics, but we must engage. We can start by rejecting one-dimensional narratives about Israel, both demonization and knee-jerk defensiveness. We can commit to listening, to learning, to reading balanced news sources and discussing them among family and friends in an attempt to understand the nuances of the world's most intractable conflict in a tiny patch of land in the desert shared by millions of people. Most importantly, we need to educate ourselves and learn how to respond when legitimate criticism of government and policy becomes obscured by anti-Semitism. How we support Israel also matters. When we add our voices and resources to causes of justice and support those organizations that participate in the advancement of a more equitable Israeli society, one that champions economic and racial justice, women and minority rights, and one that works towards religious pluralism. This is the Israel that I fight for, the one that I engage with every day, the one that I love, and the one that I invite you to discover with me. At the end of June, our family plans to celebrate Ari's bar mitzvah in Jerusalem next to the Western Wall, on an excavated area called the Herodian Street, the very place where thousands of years ago Jewish pilgrims would enter the sanctuary of the ancient temple to worship. It's a sight to behold that connects us with the generations of our people and the land of our ancestors standing on the worn path, the very foundation of Jewish civilization. We invite you to come with us on our 10-day exploration of Israel, to learn, to experience Israel on a journey that takes us through ancient and modern times and engages us with the complexity and undeterred hope that embodies Israel. Ido will join together with our family and with our congregation once more when we are in Israel. He's already planned to request those days off as leave from his army service. At that time, he expects to be a commander of his own unit. And when we meet, we'll all embrace, and I will thank him for the sacrifices he's made and continues to make to protect and defend the state of Israel, to preserve a home of peace and democratic values, a home of discourse and dialogue, a home of innovation, wonder, and hope. For me, for my family, and for us all. Shana Tova.